The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Windermere Palace as Queen Isabella hurried through the ornate corridors, her silk slippers making barely a whisper against the cold stone. Something was terribly wrong. Her daughter, Princess Elena, had not emerged from her chambers for 3 days, and the servants spoke in hushed whispers about strange lights emanating from beneath her door during the darkest hours of night. King Alexander stood at the window of the royal study, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the sprawling gardens below. The weight of the crown seemed heavier today, pressing down upon his graying temples with an almost physical force. His wife entered the room with the same worried expression she had worn for days, her usually perfect composure cracking like fragile porcelain. "She still refuses to see anyone," Isabella whispered, her voice barely audible above the ticking of the grandfather clock that had marked time in this room for generations. The physician, the tutors, even her closest friends have all been turned away.
"Alexander, I fear something has happened to our daughter that we do not yet understand." The king turned from the window, his deep blue eyes reflecting a mixture of concern and bewilderment that mirrored his wife's own feelings.
Elena had always been their most spirited child, full of laughter and mischief, with a curiosity that often led her into harmless trouble. But this withdrawal, this sudden change in her behavior, was unlike anything they had ever witnessed. "What did the guards report?" Alexander asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The royal guards were trained to observe and protect, but they were also bound by strict protocols about respecting the privacy of the royal family members. "They speak of voices," Isabella replied, wrapping her arms around herself as if warding off a sudden chill. "Not conversations, but a single voice. Elena's voice. She appears to be speaking to someone, but when they listen carefully, they hear no responses. And the light, Alexander. They describe it as neither candlelight nor lamplight, but something else entirely. Something that seems to pulse with its own rhythm." The royal couple had ruled the kingdom of Astoria for over 20 years, navigating political alliances, economic challenges, and the delicate balance of maintaining their realm's independence in an increasingly complex world. They had weathered storms both literal and metaphorical, stood united against threats both foreign and domestic. But nothing in their experience had prepared them for the mystery that now surrounded their beloved daughter. Princess Elena had celebrated her 16th birthday just 2 months prior, a grand celebration that had brought nobles and dignitaries from across the continent to Windermere Palace. She had danced with grace, spoken with wisdom beyond her years, and charmed every guest with her natural warmth and intelligence. The kingdom had looked upon her with pride, seeing in her the future of their realm. But the change had begun gradually, so subtly at first that even her parents had not immediately recognized the signs. Elena had started spending more time alone, claiming she needed space for reflection and study. Her appetite had diminished, and dark circles had appeared beneath her eyes, as though sleep eluded her. Her lady-in-waiting, Sarah, had mentioned that the princess often stood at her window for hours, gazing out at the mountains that bordered their kingdom, as if searching for something in the distance. "Perhaps we should summon the royal physician again," Isabella suggested, though they both knew that Dr. Harrington had found nothing physically wrong with Elena during his previous examination. The princess had submitted to his questions and tests with unusual compliance, but had offered no explanation for her changed behavior. Alexander moved to his desk where documents requiring his attention lay scattered across the polished surface. Affairs of state continued regardless of personal concerns, but he found it increasingly difficult to concentrate on trade agreements and diplomatic correspondence when his daughter's well-being remained such a mystery. "I have been thinking," he said slowly, choosing his words with care, "about the stories my grandmother used to tell, the old legends about our bloodline, about the gifts that were said to run through certain members of the royal family." Isabella's eyes widened slightly. She knew the stories he referenced, tales that had been passed down through generations but were rarely spoken of in modern times. Stories of ancestors who possessed unusual abilities, who could communicate across great distances or perceive things others could not. Most dismissed these tales as folklore, colorful family mythology designed to enhance the mystique of the royal bloodline. "You think Elena might be experiencing something related to those old stories?" Isabella asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The possibility seemed both impossible and oddly comforting. At least it would provide some explanation for the inexplicable changes in their daughter.
I think we must consider all possibilities, Alexander replied. Our daughter is no ordinary young woman, Isabella. She has always shown remarkable intuition, an ability to read people and situations with uncanny accuracy. Perhaps what we are witnessing is not illness or distress, but an awakening of some kind. The queen moved to the window where her husband had been standing, looking out at the gardens where Elena had once played as a child. The roses were in full bloom, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the worry that clouded the palace. She remembered Elena as a little girl, always asking questions about everything she saw, always wanting to understand the world around her in ways that went beyond simple explanation. If that is true, Isabella said softly, then we must find a way to help her understand what is happening. She must be frightened and confused, trying to make sense of experiences she cannot explain. As if summoned by their conversation, a soft knock came at the study door. Sarah, Elena's lady-in-waiting, entered with a curtsy, her young face etched with concern. "Your Majesties," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Princess Elena has asked to see you both. She says it is urgent, and that she finally understands what she must tell you." Alexander and Isabella exchanged glances, relief and apprehension warring in their expressions. After days of silence and isolation, their daughter was finally ready to speak. Whatever revelation awaited them, they knew their lives were about to change forever. The corridors of Windsor Palace had never felt longer, as King Alexander and Queen Isabella made their way to their daughter's chambers. Each step echoed with anticipation and dread, their hearts beating in rhythm with their footsteps on the ancient stones. The tapestries that lined the walls seemed to watch their passage, depicting scenes of royal triumphs and celebrations that now felt like memories from another lifetime. Princess Elena's chambers occupied the eastern wing of the palace, positioned to catch the first light of dawn. As they approached her door, both parents noticed an unusual quality to the air itself. It felt charged somehow, like the moments before a thunderstorm, when the very atmosphere seems to hold its breath in anticipation. Sarah knocked gently on the carved oak door, announcing their presence with the formal protocols that governed all royal interactions. "Your Royal Highnesses, their Majesties the King and Queen have arrived as requested. Please come in," came Elena's voice from within, and both parents were struck by how different she sounded. There was a new quality to her tone, something deeper and more resonant than they remembered. It carried a weight that seemed beyond her 16 years, as though she had aged decades in the span of a few days. When the door opened, Isabella gasped softly and reached for her husband's arm. The young woman who stood before them was unmistakably their daughter, yet she seemed transformed in ways that defied immediate explanation. Elena's dark hair, which had always been her pride, now seemed to shimmer with an inner light, catching and reflecting illumination that had no apparent source. Her eyes, inherited from her father's line, had always been a striking blue, but now they held depths that seemed almost infinite. "Mother, father," Elena said, moving toward them with a grace that was both familiar and utterly new. "I know you have been worried about me, and I am sorry for the concern I have caused. I needed time to understand what was happening to me before I could explain it to anyone else." The chamber itself bore signs of her recent transformation. Books lay open across every surface, volumes pulled from the royal library that dealt with history, philosophy, and subjects her parents had not known she was studying. Maps covered one wall, marked with symbols and notations in Elena's careful handwriting, but most striking were the mirrors that had been repositioned throughout the room, each angled to catch light from the others, creating a complex pattern of reflection and illumination. Alexander found his voice first, though it came out rougher than he intended. "Elena, what has happened to you? We have been beside ourselves with worry. You look..." He struggled for words that could adequately describe the change in his daughter. "Different," Elena finished for him, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I know, Father, I am different. Or perhaps it would be more accurate to say that I am finally becoming who I was always meant to be." Isabella moved closer to her daughter, maternal instincts overriding the strangeness of the situation. She reached out to touch Elena's face, and when their skin made contact, she felt a subtle vibration, like a tuning fork struck in perfect pitch. "Tell us everything," Isabella whispered. "We are your parents. Whatever this is, whatever you are experiencing, we will face it together."
Elena nodded and gestured for them to sit in the comfortable chairs that had been arranged near the fireplace.
Though no fire burned in the hearth, the room was warm, heated by some source that neither parent could identify. "Do you remember the stories great-grandmother Celeste used to tell?" Elena began, settling into her own chair with fluid grace. "The ones about our ancestors who possessed special gifts? About Queen Lydia who could speak with people across great distances without ever leaving her chamber? About Prince Marcus who could see events happening in distant lands?" Alexander leaned forward. "Those were family legends, Elena. Stories passed down through generations, embellished over time." "No, father," Elena said quietly. "They were not legends. Do we count them some new?" "They were family history, and the abilities they described are real. They have been dormant in our bloodline for several generations, but now they are awakening again. In me." The princess rose and moved to one of the maps on her wall, pointing to various locations marked with her symbols. 3 days ago, I began to hear voices, not voices speaking to me, but voices speaking to each other across vast distances. Conversations between people in kingdoms hundreds of miles from here. At first, I thought I was losing my mind. The voices were so clear, so vivid, that I was certain there were people in my room with me. Isabella felt a chill run down her spine. "The guards said they heard you talking to someone." "I was," Elena confirmed. "Once I realized what was happening, I began to experiment. I discovered that I could not only hear these distant conversations, but also speak into them. I made contact with others who possess similar abilities. There are not many of us, but we exist. We have always existed, scattered across the world, most of us unaware of what we truly are." She moved to her desk and picked up a leather-bound journal filled with her precise handwriting. "I have been documenting everything, every conversation I have heard, every person I have made contact with, every new ability that has manifested." "New abilities?" Alexander asked, though he was not certain he wanted to know the answer. Elena returned to her chair, the journal clutched in her hands. The voices were only the beginning. "Yesterday, I discovered that I can see things happening in other places, not just hear about them, but actually witness them as if I were there. I watched a battle taking place in the northern territories of Valdoria. I saw ships approaching the coast of Meridia that their own scouts had not yet spotted. The implications of what their daughter was describing began to sink in for both parents. If Elena truly possessed these abilities, the consequences would extend far beyond their family. A princess who could gather intelligence from across the known world, who could communicate instantly across vast distances, would be viewed as either an invaluable asset or a dangerous threat by every kingdom and empire. "Elena," Isabella said carefully, "have you told anyone else about this?" "No one in our kingdom knows," Elena replied. "But the others like me, the ones I have made contact with. They have warned me about the dangers of revelation. Throughout history, people with our abilities have been persecuted, used, or worse. Some have been branded as witches or demons. Others have been imprisoned by rulers who wanted to control their powers." Alexander stood and began pacing, his mind racing through the political ramifications. "If word of this reaches the wrong ears, you could become a target. Other kingdoms might try to kidnap you to use your abilities for their own purposes. Or they might see you as such a threat that they would try to eliminate you entirely." "I understand the dangers, father," Elena said, "but I also understand the responsibilities that come with these gifts. I have seen things in my visions, heard conversations that suggest dark times are coming. There are forces moving against our kingdom and others like it. Wars are being planned. Alliances are being forged in secret. The information I can gather could save countless lives." Isabella moved to the window, looking out at the peaceful kingdom that spread below the palace. Citizens went about their daily lives unaware that their princess had been transformed into something that existed beyond their understanding. How could they protect Elena while also protecting the kingdom that might soon depend on her unique abilities? "There is something else," Elena said softly, and both parents turned back to her. "The others like me? They say that abilities like ours often come in waves. When one person awakens, it can trigger awakenings in others who carry the bloodline. My transformation may not be an isolated event." As if summoned by her words, a commotion arose in the corridor outside Elena's chambers. Shouting voices, running footsteps,
and the sound of urgent activity filled the air beyond the thick oak door. Sarah burst into the room without ceremony, her face pale with alarm. "Your Majesties," she gasped, "Prince Adrian has collapsed in the training yards. The physicians say he is unconscious but uninjured, and there are strange lights surrounding his body." Elena rose slowly, her transformed features grave with understanding. "It has begun," she whispered. "The awakening is spreading through our family. Adrian is only the first." The training yards of Windermere Palace had been cleared of all but essential personnel by the time the royal family arrived. Prince Adrian lay motionless on a stretcher that had been positioned in the center of the courtyard, surrounded by a circle of shimmering light that pulsed with each breath he took. Dr. Harrington knelt beside the unconscious prince, his instruments useless against a phenomenon that defied medical explanation. Elena approached her younger brother without hesitation, stepping directly into the circle of light that had kept everyone else at bay. The moment she crossed the threshold, the pulsing intensified, and Adrian's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, brother and sister simply stared at each other, and observers later swore they could see some form of communication passing between them, though no words were spoken. "Adrian," Elena whispered, kneeling beside the stretcher. "Can you hear me?" The 14-year-old prince struggled to sit up, confusion evident in his features. "Elena, what happened?" "I was practicing sword forms with Sir Marcus, and suddenly I felt like lightning was coursing through my veins. Then everything around me became so bright I couldn't see, and I heard voices calling my name from everywhere at once. King Alexander and Queen Isabella watched from outside the circle of light, afraid to interfere with whatever was transpiring between their children. The light seemed to create a barrier that separated the two young royals from the rest of the world, and every instinct told the parents that interrupting this process could be dangerous. The same thing happened to me," Elena said softly, helping Adrian to his feet. "You are awakening, brother. The abilities that have been dormant in our bloodline are manifesting in you, just as they did in me." As Adrian stood, the circle of light began to expand, encompassing more of the courtyard. Several of the watching guards stepped back nervously, but Elena gestured for calm. "It will not harm you," she called out. "The light is part of the awakening process. It will fade once Adrian learns to control what is happening to him." Dr. Harrington approached the expanding circle cautiously. "Your Highness," he addressed Elena, "I must examine Prince Adrian. Whatever this phenomenon is, we need to ensure he has not been injured." Elena nodded and guided her brother toward the physician. As they moved together, the light began to stabilize, maintaining a steady glow rather than the chaotic pulsing that had initially surrounded Adrian. When Dr. Harrington's instruments came into contact with the light, they registered readings that made no sense according to conventional understanding. "His vital signs are not just normal," Dr. Harrington murmured in amazement. "They are perfect. Heart rate, breathing, blood pressure, all are optimal. It is as though his entire system has been somehow enhanced." Meanwhile, word of the strange events had spread throughout the palace. Nobles and courtiers gathered in small groups, whispering about the supernatural occurrences that seemed to be affecting the royal family. Some spoke of ancient curses, others of divine intervention. The uncertainty bred fear and speculation that threatened to spread beyond the palace walls. Lord Chancellor Edmund, the king's most trusted advisor, approached the royal couple with grave concern etched on his weathered features. "Your Majesties," he said in low tones, "we must consider how to manage the information about these events. If word reaches our enemies that the royal family is experiencing unusual circumstances, it could be seen as either a sign of weakness or a threat to be eliminated." Alexander nodded grimly. The political implications of their children's transformations weighed heavily on his mind. "Have all witnesses sworn to secrecy for now," he instructed. "We need time to understand what we are dealing with before we decide how much, if anything, to reveal to the kingdom." As the afternoon wore on, Adrian's condition continued to stabilize under Elena's guidance. She helped him recognize the new sensations he was experiencing, teaching him to distinguish between his own thoughts and the distant voices that were beginning to filter into his consciousness. Unlike Elena's gradual awakening, Adrian's abilities seemed to manifest with startling intensity. "I can hear the kitchen staff discussing tonight's menu," Adrian said in wonder, but they are 3 floors below us and on the opposite side of the palace. And there are other voices, from much farther away, people speaking languages I do not recognize, in places I have never seen. Elena smiled with understanding. Your abilities are manifesting more quickly than mine did. Perhaps because you have me here to help you understand what is happening, or perhaps because the awakening is gaining momentum as it spreads through our family. The mention of spreading abilities proved prophetic. As the sun began to set, a messenger arrived with urgent news from the palace's western wing. Princess Sophia, Elena's younger sister, had been found in the library surrounded by books that were floating in the air around her, their pages turning of their own accord as if being read by invisible eyes. The 12-year-old princess was discovered by the head librarian, who initially thought he was witnessing some elaborate prank. But when he approached to investigate, Sophia turned to him with eyes that glowed with the same inner light that had begun to characterize her siblings' transformations. She spoke to me without moving her lips, the terrified librarian reported to the king. I heard her voice clearly in my mind, asking me not to be afraid. Then all the books settled gently to the floor, and she collapsed into one of the reading chairs. By nightfall, all 3 of the royal children had been gathered in Elena's chambers, which had become an impromptu sanctuary for their family's supernatural transformation. The room now pulsed with a gentle radiance that seemed to emanate from the children themselves, creating an atmosphere of otherworldly calm. Princess Sophia, despite being the youngest to experience the awakening, showed remarkable composure. Her abilities appeared to center around knowledge and learning. She could access information from books without reading them, understand languages she had never studied, and comprehend complex concepts with startling ease. I know things now that I never learned, Sophia explained to her parents, her young voice carrying new depths of understanding. I can see the connections between events that happened centuries apart. I understand the true history of our kingdom, including parts that were deliberately hidden or forgotten. The implications of Sophia's revelations added another layer of complexity to their situation. If she truly had access to hidden historical knowledge, she might uncover secrets that powerful people had killed to protect. The royal family was not only dealing with supernatural abilities, but also potentially explosive information. As the family gathered around Elena's fireplace, they began to plan their next steps. The children's abilities were clearly still developing, and they needed guidance to learn control and discretion. Elena had established contact with others like them across the world, but bringing in outside advisors carried enormous risks. We need to create a cover story, Isabella said practically. The palace staff have witnessed too much to simply ignore what has happened. We must give them an explanation that will satisfy their curiosity without revealing the true nature of your abilities. Alexander agreed. We will say that the children have been affected by exposure to an ancient artifact found during renovations of the palace foundations. Something that caused temporary disorientation but no lasting harm. It will explain the strange lights and behavior without suggesting anything supernatural. Elena nodded approvingly. That should work for most people. But we also need to prepare for the possibility that our abilities will continue to grow and become harder to conceal. The others I have spoken with say that the awakening process can last for months, with new capabilities manifesting unpredictably. As if to underscore her point, Adrian suddenly stiffened in his chair, his eyes taking on the distant look that indicated he was perceiving something beyond the room. Elena, he said urgently, I am seeing something. Ships approaching our coast under cover of darkness. Foreign vessels with no identifying banners. They carry armed men and siege equipment. The family stared at him in shock. If Adrian's vision was accurate, their kingdom was under immediate threat of invasion. The very abilities that had seemed like a curse might now prove to be their salvation. Elena quickly turned her attention to her own expanded senses, reaching out across the distances to confirm what Adrian had seen. He is right, she whispered. An invasion fleet approaches from the southeast. They plan to make landfall before dawn and strike at the capital while most of our defenses are unprepared. King Alexander rose from his chair, his expression shifting from concerned father to military commander. How many ships? How many men? Can you determine their origin? The 3 royal children concentrated together, their combined abilities providing unprecedented intelligence about the approaching threat.
In that moment, the transformation that had terrified and confused them revealed its true purpose. They were not victims of some supernatural curse, but guardians blessed with the power to protect their kingdom in its hour of greatest need. The war room of Windermere Palace had never hosted such an extraordinary council of war. Maps spread across the massive oak table showed the coastline where enemy ships approached under the cover of darkness. But the intelligence being gathered came not from scouts or spies, but from 3 transformed royal children whose abilities defied conventional understanding. Elena stood at the center of the room, her eyes closed in concentration as she extended her consciousness across the waters. 37 ships, she reported, her voice carrying an otherworldly authority. Approximately 800 men armed with siege engines and equipped for a prolonged assault. They planned to establish a beachhead at Crescent Bay and march inland at first light. Adrian, his newly awakened powers focused on immediate tactical intelligence, added crucial details. Their commander is someone called Lord Voss. He carries correspondence that suggests this invasion has been planned for months. They have detailed maps of our defenses, which means they have had spies in the kingdom for some time. Princess Sophia, her abilities granting access to historical and strategic knowledge, provided context that chilled everyone in the room. Lord Voss is the exiled brother of King Dominic of Ravencrest. He was banished 15 years ago for attempting to overthrow his brother's rule. The invasion is not just about conquering our kingdom, but about establishing a base from which he can launch his return to Ravencrest. King Alexander paced around the table, his mind racing as he processed this unprecedented intelligence. General Marcus, the kingdom's highest military commander, struggled to accept information gathered by supernatural means, but the specificity and detail of the children's reports left little room for doubt. Even if we accept that this intelligence is accurate, General Marcus said carefully, we have barely 6 hours before they make landfall. Our coastal defenses are minimal at Crescent Bay, and most of our army is scattered across the kingdom on routine patrols. Then we use the advantage their abilities give us, Alexander declared. Elena, can you communicate with our military commanders across the kingdom? Warn them about the invasion and coordinate a response? Elena nodded, but her expression showed concern. I can reach them, but explaining how I obtained this information will be challenging. Military leaders tend to be skeptical of intelligence that comes from unconventional sources. Isabella, who had been quietly observing the proceedings, stepped forward. Then we tell them the information came from captured enemy scouts. We say our patrols intercepted advance reconnaissance teams and extracted the invasion plans under interrogation. It was a pragmatic solution that would allow them to act on Elena's intelligence without revealing the supernatural source. But as the family and military advisors began planning their defense strategy, they faced a more fundamental question. How much should the royal children be involved in the actual battle? You must stay in the palace, Alexander insisted. Your abilities are too valuable to risk in direct combat, and we still do not fully understand the extent of your powers or their limitations. Elena shook her head firmly. Father, our abilities are not just intelligence-gathering tools. Adrian has discovered that he can project illusions over short distances. Sophia can access tactical knowledge from every military campaign in recorded history. We could be the difference between victory and defeat. The debate was interrupted by Adrian, who had been maintaining surveillance of the approaching fleet. The enemy ships have changed course, he announced urgently. They are no longer heading for Crescent Bay. Lord Voss has divided his fleet. Half the ships continue to Crescent Bay as planned, but the other half is moving toward Port Avalon. General Marcus cursed under his breath. Port Avalon was the kingdom's primary harbor, heavily fortified but unprepared for a night assault. If the enemy could take the port, they would control the kingdom's maritime trade and have a secure supply line for their invasion force. This is exactly why we need to be involved, Elena argued. The situation is changing too rapidly for conventional military responses. We can adapt and coordinate in real time, providing intelligence and tactical support that no traditional force could match. As dawn approached, the royal family made a decision that would define not only the coming battle, but the future of their kingdom. The 3 transformed children would take an active role in the defense, using their abilities to coordinate resistance efforts and gather real-time intelligence about enemy movements. Elena established communication links with military commanders across the kingdom,
her mind reaching across vast distances to coordinate troop movements and defensive positions. Her ability to instantly relay information between widely separated forces gave the kingdom's defenders an unprecedented advantage in tactical coordination. Adrian positioned himself where he could maintain visual contact with both invasion forces, using his newfound powers to project false images and confuse enemy scouts. Ships found themselves navigating by landmarks that shifted and changed, causing several vessels to run aground on hidden reefs that should have been clearly visible. Sophia remained in the palace library, her enhanced abilities allowing her to access centuries of military knowledge and provide strategic insights that proved invaluable. She identified weaknesses in the enemy formations that even experienced generals had missed, drawing on tactical innovations from dozens of historical campaigns. The battle began just as the sun crested the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that seemed to mirror the transformation that had overtaken the royal family. The enemy forces, expecting to face unprepared defenders, instead found themselves confronting a precisely coordinated defense that anticipated their every move. At Crescent Bay, Lord Voss's primary force encountered defensive positions that seemed to have been prepared specifically for their arrival. Archers were positioned to exploit every weakness in their formation, and siege engines found their targets protected by barriers that appeared to have been constructed overnight. At Port Avalon, the secondary invasion force discovered that their supposedly secret approach had been detected and countered. Harbor chains had been raised to block their passage, and the port's defenders were waiting in positions that suggested detailed knowledge of the invasion plan. But the true test of the royal children's abilities came when Lord Voss, realizing that his carefully planned surprise attack had been completely compromised, decided to change tactics entirely. Rather than proceeding with the siege, he ordered his forces to withdraw and regroup, planning to strike at an entirely different target. Elena detected the change in enemy intentions moments after Lord Voss made his decision. "They are pulling back from both landing sites," she reported to her father. "But this is not a retreat. Lord Voss is redirecting his entire force toward the village of Millhaven. He plans to take hostages and use them as leverage to force our surrender." Millhaven was a peaceful farming community with no military defenses, populated by families who had no warning of the approaching danger. The village's isolation, which had always been its protection, now made it the perfect target for an enemy seeking to exploit the kingdom's humanitarian instincts. "How long do we have?" Alexander asked, his face grim with the realization that the enemy had found a way to turn their defensive success into a potential catastrophe. 2 hours, perhaps 3, Elena replied. "But our nearest military forces are half a day's march from Millhaven. We cannot reach them in time through conventional means." As the royal family grappled with this new crisis, they realized that their supernatural abilities, remarkable as they were, might not be sufficient to prevent a massacre. They needed to find a way to protect innocent civilians from an enemy who had proven both cunning and ruthless. It was Princess Sophia who provided the solution, drawing on knowledge that seemed to come from sources beyond conventional learning. "There is another way," she said quietly. "The abilities that have awakened in us are not the only supernatural forces in this kingdom. There are others hidden throughout the realm who have been waiting for this awakening to reveal themselves." The transformation of the royal family, it seemed, was only the beginning of changes that would reshape not just their kingdom, but their understanding of the world itself. The revelation that other supernatural beings existed within the kingdom came as Elena reached out with her enhanced consciousness, searching desperately for any way to protect the village of Millhaven. As her awareness expanded beyond its previous limits, she encountered minds that felt both familiar and utterly alien. These were not the distant voices of other awakened humans she had grown accustomed to, but something far more ancient and powerful. "There are others," Elena whispered, her eyes wide with amazement. "Throughout the kingdom, beings who have been hiding among our people for generations. They have been waiting for the royal bloodline to awaken so they could reveal themselves." Princess Sophia nodded, her access to hidden knowledge confirming her sister's discovery. "They are the guardians," she said, her young voice carrying wisdom that seemed to come from ages past. "Ancient protectors who bound themselves to this land long before our ancestors established the kingdom. They have remained hidden, watching and waiting for the time when their intervention would be needed." King Alexander stared at his daughters,
struggling to process revelations that challenged everything he thought he knew about his realm. "You are saying there are supernatural beings living among our citizens? How is such a thing possible?" "They appear human to casual observation," Elena explained, her connection with these hidden guardians growing stronger by the moment. "Some serve as blacksmiths, others as merchants or farmers. They have lived normal lives for decades, but they possess abilities that make our own transformation seem modest in comparison." As if summoned by their conversation, a figure appeared in the war room without using any of the doors. The newcomer was a middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that held depths similar to those that had developed in the royal children. She wore the simple clothing of a palace servant, and Queen Isabella recognized her as one of the kitchen staff who had worked at Windmere for over 20 years. "Your Majesties," the woman said, offering a bow that carried more dignity than any courtly gesture. "I am Liana, and I speak for the Guardians of Astoria. We have maintained our concealment for centuries, but the awakening of the royal bloodline signals that the time for hiding has ended. The transformation of a trusted servant into something beyond human understanding left the royal family speechless. General Marcus reached instinctively for his sword, but King Alexander gestured for restraint. If this woman meant them harm, she could have acted against them years ago. "The village of Millhaven is under threat," Elena said, finding her voice first. "Can you and the other guardians help protect the innocent people there?" Liana smiled, an expression that seemed to carry the warmth of summer sunlight. "That is precisely why we have revealed ourselves. The enemy fleet threatens not just your kingdom, but the balance that has protected this land for generations. Lord Voss carries with him artifacts of dark power, items that could corrupt the very soil of Astoria if he is allowed to use them." Princess Sophia gasped as new knowledge flooded her consciousness. The siege engines on his ships are not conventional weapons. They have been enhanced with shadow magic, designed not just to destroy buildings but to drain the life force from the land itself. If he uses them, the affected areas will become wastelands where nothing can grow for generations. The stakes of the conflict had suddenly escalated beyond a simple invasion. Lord Voss was not just seeking to conquer territory, but to permanently damage the kingdom's ability to sustain life. The implications were staggering, and conventional military responses would be utterly inadequate against such weapons. "The Guardians have been preparing for this possibility," Liana continued. "We have the power to neutralize his dark artifacts, but we cannot act alone. The awakened royal bloodline must work with us to create a protective barrier around the threatened areas." Elena stepped forward, her transformed nature resonating with the Guardian's presence. "What do you need us to do?" "You must link your consciousness with ours," Liana explained. "Your abilities have created a connection between the physical and spiritual aspects of this land. Through that connection, we can channel protective energies that will shield Millhaven and neutralize Lord Voss's weapons." The process that followed challenged every assumption the royal family held about reality. Elena, Adrian, and Sophia joined hands with Liana, their combined consciousness reaching out to connect with Guardians positioned throughout the kingdom. The palace war room became the center of a vast network of supernatural awareness that encompassed the entire realm. Through this network, the royal children could perceive the true nature of their kingdom. They saw the flows of natural energy that connected every living thing, the ancient protective spells woven into the very foundations of major settlements, and the delicate balance that the Guardians had maintained for centuries. But they also saw the approaching corruption. Lord Voss's ships carried shadows that seemed to devour light itself, and his weapons pulsed with malevolent energy that sought to twist and destroy everything it touched. The invasion was not just a military threat, but a spiritual assault on the kingdom's essence. As the protective network activated, citizens throughout Astoria witnessed phenomena that would become legend. In Millhaven, a dome of shimmering light appeared over the village just as Lord Voss's forces arrived. His shadow-enhanced weapons struck the barrier harmlessly, their dark energy dissipating like smoke in a strong wind. At sea, the invasion fleet found itself surrounded by manifestations that defied explanation. Massive figures of light rose from the ocean depths, their forms suggesting the ancient guardians of the realm. The enemy ships, which had seemed so formidable in darkness, appeared fragile and insignificant against these towering protectors. Lord Voss himself stood on the deck of his flagship, watching his carefully planned invasion crumble before forces he had never imagined existed. The artifacts that were supposed to guarantee his victory proved useless against defenders who drew their power from the land itself. From the palace war room, the royal family observed the battle through their enhanced perception. They could see the fear and confusion spreading through the enemy ranks as soldiers confronted supernatural forces that rendered their weapons meaningless. "The invasion is failing," Adrian reported, his ability to perceive distant events providing real-time intelligence. "Lord Voss's troops are beginning to abandon their ships. They are terrified and demoralized." But Lyanna's expression remained grave. "Lord Voss himself has not given up. He carries the most powerful of the dark artifacts, a weapon capable of striking directly at the heart of our protective network. He is preparing to use it against the palace itself." Elena felt the Guardian's words like a physical blow. Through her enhanced senses, she could perceive the malevolent energy gathering around Lord Voss's flagship. He was channeling the power of his remaining artifacts into a single devastating attack aimed at Windermere Palace. "Can our defenses withstand it?" King Alexander asked, his voice tight with concern for his family and his kingdom. "Not without cost," Lyanna admitted. "To repel an attack of that magnitude, the Guardians will have to reveal the full extent of our powers. After today, the supernatural nature of this kingdom's protection will be known to all. There will be no returning to the way things were." Queen Isabella looked at her transformed children, seeing in their faces a strength and wisdom that seemed to have aged them years in the span of days. "Then we face that future together," she said firmly. "Whatever our kingdom becomes, we will adapt and protect it." As Lord Voss unleashed his final desperate attack, a beam of pure darkness streaked toward Windermere Palace. But it struck not just the physical structure, but the combined will of the royal family and their guardian protectors. The collision between light and shadow created a spectacular display that could be seen for miles, a battle between opposing forces that would determine the fate of the kingdom. When the light faded and the echoes of supernatural combat finally stilled, Astoria had been forever changed. The invasion had been repelled, but the kingdom's hidden nature had been revealed. The royal family's transformation from ordinary humans into awakened guardians marked the beginning of a new age, one in which the supernatural and mundane would exist side by side. Elena stood at her window, looking out over a kingdom that now pulsed with visible energy. Citizens who had lived their entire lives unaware of the magic that protected them now saw streams of light connecting every village and town. The Guardians had stepped out of hiding, and the awakened royal bloodline had accepted its role as the bridge between the human and supernatural worlds. The tears that King Alexander and Queen Isabella shed were not of sorrow but of overwhelming pride and wonder at what their children had become. The transformation that had once terrified them now represented hope for a future where their kingdom could face any threat with powers that transcended conventional understanding. Princess Charlotte's shocking transformation, as the kingdom would remember it, was not a tragedy but a miracle that had saved them all. The awakening of the royal bloodline had ushered in an era of unprecedented protection and possibility, ensuring that Astoria would stand as a beacon of light against the darkness for generations to come.